So I took the MCAT a day before my first infectious disease exam. I studied over the summer and I took it and I bombed it. You kind of have that mindset like, hey, I'm a pharmacist. Look, I can probably finesse it, but you learn really quick. You get humbled by that test.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist Podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland, and I'm a licensed pharmacist and fourth-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. As this podcast has grown, we've had the tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional healthcare careers. Tune in to hear from our non-traditional experts serving at the frontier of medicine, technology, and innovation. Dr. Michael Ogbonna is a licensed pharmacist and first-year medical student at LSU School of Medicine. Dr. Ogbonna attended Xavier University of Louisiana, where he obtained his PharmD in 2020. After working as a retail pharmacist for several years, he made the difficult decision to go back to medical school. In this episode, we'll explore his rationale for making this career switch, address the challenges he's had to face as a non-traditional applicant, and even learn about how he's created a YouTube channel to document his own journey. Let's get into it. Alrighty, welcome to the show, Dr. Ogbonna. Happy to have you today.
Hey, Nathan, thanks so much. It's an honor to be here.
Of course. And it's so nice to see like another physician pharmacist who's kind of traveling on the same path that I've taken. And it's just like really fun to see like the excitement of starting medical school and like hearing about all this like material that I had like gone through in a couple years ago. And it feels like so distant at this point. And it's just really cool to see like what you're doing and with like your YouTube channel and like coming on the podcast today.
Dude, thank you. I mean, it's honestly an honor to be here. I remember when I was applying, I ran across your book and I was like, man, someone wrote a book about this. Because I remember when I first had the idea or the thought of going to medical school when I was in pharmacy school, it was 2018 and there really wasn't much about it. But then when I actually started to make that move, I saw that you wrote a book and everything. So it's props to you, man. It's been great. And like your platform is helping so many people. So like, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And so let's talk a little bit more about like your experience and what kind of led you down this, kind of unique path. So from the beginning, can you tell us where you're from and what your life was like prior to going to pharmacy school?
Yeah, definitely. So, I was actually born in the state of Maine, believe it or not. And I know probably don't see many Black people from Maine, but yeah, I was born in the state of Maine. My parents, they're from Nigeria. So they came to America in the 90s. And my dad is actually a pharmacist. So, he actually stepped out. He worked at Rite Aid for a while and then he opened his own. Because of that, I kind of see a lot. And I'm sure people that you've interviewed that have this, like a similar story as me, is they probably had some type of pharmacy influence and they kind of just liked it and just went into it. But then as they went into pharmacy school, they're like, oh, I kind of want to be a doctor. So that's kind of what happened to me. Like I grew up in Maine, grew up there until I was 16. Then I moved to Texas in 2012, finished high school. So I moved when I was a junior, going into my junior year, finished high school. Then when I was deciding what I want to do for college, in a Nigerian household, it's kind of just like you're either a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or you're a failure. That's how they see it, But I honestly, to be honest with you, Nathan, I wasn't really thinking far ahead because I was playing basketball at the time and I was just like, I'm going to play in college. Even though I'm like 5'6", I had this like dream that I'm going to play in college. But anyways, obviously I didn't go. But when I decided like, what am I going to do next? I saw my dad. He's a pharmacist. I kind of worked there a little bit. So I was just like, hey, I'm going to just go to pharmacy school. And the thing that made it a lot easier is that I went to Xavier University of Louisiana. And they had this program at the time, which some programs have it, where like I got accepted like out of high school. So pretty much if I kept the 3 whatever GPA, I was already in the pharmacy school. I didn't even really have to take the PCAT or anything. Mm-hmm. And so I did 2 years of undergrad. went straight into pharmacy school in 2016. Finished pharmacy school, but when I was in pharmacy school is when I had like the realization that I kind of wanted to like go to medical school. But I can let you like ask another question if you want.
Yeah, definitely. That's really cool that you had this exposure, like that your father kind of influenced you to choose pharmacy. And I did a similar program too, where I did the 2+4 program in the sense where it's kind of like right through high school. And it was really nice because you kind of did like this accelerated first 2 years, which wasn't super fun, but I think it prepared me well for kind of the rigors of pharmacy. Maybe not like, equivalent to that, but it certainly was, it kept me busy in those early
Yeah.
years. And so that's awesome. So what was your like pharmacy school experience like? You talk about how you got through it and you really latched onto medicine after the fact. So what was it like going through pharmacy school? Were there like seeds kind of sprinkled along the way or?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of my friends, I have a couple friends that came into like Xavier pre-pharmacy with me. And like right before we were going to go to pharmacy school, like some of them switched to pre-med. And I remember one of my friends right now, he's like a second year, he's like a PGY2 emergency medicine resident right now.
Mhm.
And he was one of the guys who was like, hey, bro, you should switch over. Like, I know you want to. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm going to do pharmacy. And the reason why, and this will lead into what, my whole story is, like I said, my parents, they're amazing, raised me wonderful. But like sometimes there is that pressure to like be a doctor, to like make your parents proud and just do it. Cause it's like, it looks so great. But, that type of vibe kind of like pushed me away from wanting to be a doctor. It kind of just made me not kind of resent doing it for that reason. I was going to be like, if I want to be a doctor and go through all that school, I want to do it because I actually want to do it, not because my parents want me to do it. So because of that, I went into pharmacy school and I actually had a blast in pharmacy school. And I'm sure other people that went this PharmD to MD route will say the same thing. Like, it's not like you didn't like pharmacy. You enjoyed pharmacy. You just wanted a little bit more. And that's kind of what happened to me. It was my first year, went great. Like, wasn't like, I didn't find it too difficult. I had a good time learning everything. It was my second year. We started doing like disease state management stuff. Started actually doing clinical stuff. You start learning. And then you start to think like, man, I wish I could diagnose things instead of just like going straight into the pharmacology. Then you start thinking about stuff like that. And then really what happened for me, which is probably the same that happens for other people, is like your first inpatient clinical rotation. You go and you round in the hospital and you watch the attendings, you see the medical students. And I wrote this in my personal statement. I was rounding with an attending and I was on my third year rotation and we were rounding and went into a patient's room and the attending was listening with the stethoscope to the patient's heart. And he was like telling the med students, hey, come listen to this. Like he wanted to have them listen to the murmur or the lungs or whatever. And I just remember thinking like, man, I wish I could listen as well. Like I didn't have the guts to ask, but in my mind, I was like, man, I want to listen too. Because I was interested in what was going on. And I think that was a moment where my first seed was planted like, man, I want to go to medical school. And anyways, obviously after that, I was like, man, I don't even think I have all the classes and stuff. Like, can it even happen? So anyways, that's that story. So I'll stop there.
It's funny too, you bring up like that first experience on clinical rotations where like you're supposed to be, you feel like you're in this weird position because you're supposed to be there watching, your preceptor and like doing the pharmacy aspect of things. But I always found myself more gravitating towards working with the medical team and kind of asking questions like, oh, how did you know how to diagnose, this impending like, complication or something along those lines. So it's just kind of funny. Like, and I think some pharmacy preceptors definitely recognize that and they see like this person wants to go on and do medicine. So it's kind of funny how that all works out. And so cool. So you, at this point in time, like you were definitely, the seeds were planted. Did you ever think about going like the pharmacy residency route where you thought to yourself, okay, maybe I should stay more so on the traditional pathway, or what happened with that?
So when I decided I wanted, like, in my heart, I was like, I want to go to med school. I actually, this summer going into my third year, I took physics 2 just in case. So I knocked that out. That was like the only prereq with the lab, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually took the MCAT. So I took the MCAT a day before my first infectious disease exam. I
Wow.
studied over the summer and I took it and I bombed it. You know, you kind of have that mindset like, hey, I'm a pharmacist. Look, I can probably finesse it, but you learn really quick. You get humbled by that test. And anyway, so I took the MCAT and I was kind of discouraged. And I was like, because I was wanting to maybe go in right after pharmacy school.
Mm-hmm.
Because you always hear, oh, once you start working and making money, you'll probably never go. And so I was like, maybe I shouldn't take a break. But ultimately after that, I was like, I'm just going to finish pharmacy school, pass my board, start working, and we'll see what happens. So because of that, I actually never thought about doing a residency, even though I was kind of telling everyone I was going on that track just in case. I didn't want to like not go in that route in case I changed my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But in my mind, I was like, I want to just work for a little bit and make some money, pay off a little bit of debt, and then just go into medical school when the time is right. I went to mid-year and everything my year, presented some research and stuff, but I never had the thought like I want to do a residency. I was always like, I'm going to just work retail, even all the nightmares you hear about it. I'm just going to work it and then make some money and then potentially go back to school.
Wow. Yeah, I think you had a lot of really good advice there. And I want to point out a few things that I always recommend to people who are listening in who might want to follow in your footsteps. One thing you brought up was getting that extracurricular prerequisite course that you needed to complete, which was obviously physics 2. A lot of the pharmacy curriculums don't build that class into their framework, and so that can actually hold you up from even applying to medical school. So if you're listening and you're thinking like, what can I do to take action on this? Certainly take the MCAT, because that's going to be the real barrier. But then once you have a good score, you know for a fact that you can get in based off of that score at least. Then go and invest the money and take some of those additional classes. Sounds like you already decided at that point that you were going regardless, so it didn't even matter. And additionally too, you brought up like the residency component, and I think that's like really good advice. Like you didn't go down the pathway of saying like, okay, maybe I'll do the residency route and see if that'll make me more competitive. That's a common question I get all the time is, well, if I want to take a gap year, and should I do a residency during that? Sure, you can certainly do that and it'll make you competitive, but you are probably going to hate yourself.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And I think it's tough too, because you'd be taking like a position away from someone who really wants to be in the pharmacy profession versus that would just be a stepping stone for you. So it's funny though, because in episode 1, my very first episode of the podcast, I interviewed Tim Doe, and he talked about his experience where he was like, I would be happy doing residency and doing the pharmacy route or medical school. So he ended up applying to both. So if you're interested in hearing that story, check it out. Quick plug for the listeners. But anyways, so wow. So then you took the MCAT. Can you reflect a little bit more about like what that experience was like for you, especially kind of expanding on what you were saying? Because I felt like I had a very similar experience too, where I walked in there, thought I was going to be top of the world. I'm a pharmacist, I can make it through. And boom, I got my score and I was like below the 37th percentile or something like that. I think I got to look up the numbers again. It's been so long.
I bombed it just right with you. I'm not going to lie. I thought I did great on it, to be honest. You know how you feel like, oh yeah, I did good on it. And I got my score back and my heart sank for like a couple of days. And so, so that was in 2018 when I took it. I really didn't do any, I was like using exam cracker books and wasn't really on like a program, just self-studying. Probably didn't really study that well at all for it. But this time around, I actually was working full time. So, but this was when I switched from, and you'll probably ask me this later, but like I started working at CVS after I graduated. And then after about a year and 7 months, I switched to an outpatient hospital pharmacy. So it wasn't inpatient. It was like outpatient retail in the hospital. And those hospital pharmacies or those retail pharmacies in the hospital, the schedule's a lot better. It's kind of like at 8 to 5:30. And so when I started working there, it made me think like, hey, I kind of have a little extra time. Like, I only worked a couple weekends a month, or no, a couple weekends every like 2 months.
Wow.
And so I had a lot of extra time. And that's when I realized I could probably like sneak in some studying before and after working on the weekends. And that's what I did. My sister, who was going to apply to medical school, but ended up changing her mind. She had like all these Kaplan books that she didn't use. And so they were up to date. And I just studied those, went back to the basics of biochemistry and biology and all that. I studied that and I used the Anki, the miles down, which is what people use.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I studied pretty much for like 2.5 months. I started, my story is kind of crazy, but I decided I want to go to med school, and I started studying for the MCAT May 31st of the application year.
Wow.
I know that sounds crazy. I know. Yeah. And so I didn't take it till August. And so I started at probably like 2.5 months of studying, and I got the score I needed.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. And definitely like, I think that's anxiety producing, because you're like, this is all or nothing right now. I'm committed to applying this cycle, and this score better turn out, because all my application stuff is probably already submitted and ready to go. And you're just waiting to hit submit.
Literally. Yeah. It was definitely, it was like I decided pretty late. But I was just like, I'm going to apply and see what happens. If I get in, I get in. If not, I'm going to try again one more time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, thankfully I got in.
Yeah. And so with your like pharmacy experience working, I think that is something that's like really helpful for individuals who are applying to medical school. I think it shows a lot of maturity, a lot of professionalism, and the fact that you're able to handle everyday conflicts. Like the pharmacy is like a war zone these days. So, like you are able to kind of address all of those things. What was that like, kind of sharing that information on interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of really cool experiences, a lot of cool patient encounters that I was able to add to my personal statement, my activity section. I was able to, during COVID, New Orleans, where I live, after Mardi Gras of that year is when it spiked. And because of that, the hospitals got overrun, and they opened like a convention center pharmacy hospital in the convention center, and
Mm-hmm.
CVS was able to help with that. And I was a part of that team. I was chosen to help with that. So just like different experiences like that I was able to add to my activity section that definitely probably made me stand out a little bit. You get, like you said, it's like a war zone, and you encounter a lot of crazy things in retail, but you also meet a lot of great people and have a lot of great patient encounters. And I had several that were memorable that I was able to add to my application. So overall, I definitely think working for me, it helped me, get into the real world, develop skills, do a couple interviews and stuff like that. So I think it was definitely helpful and definitely added to my application.
Of course. And it's kind of funny you bring up the CVS experience too, because I feel like we're living like parallel lives here. Like you took the MCAT before I did, but I was also in infectious disease, like in that same kind of time period when I was like queuing up my MCAT experience. And then you were working at CVS during the pandemic, and so was I. So it's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. So you obviously had a great experience applying to medical school. And I guess like another thing that comes up very frequently is, how do you explain like this transition to your peers, your friends, your family? Like it sounds like your parents were like very gung ho about going down the medical route, but I think for pharmacists who are making this career switch, it can be sometimes challenging, because I don't think a lot of people understand what goes into it, and they can't really comprehend like why you're making this radical decision. So like, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. It's kind of weird because you don't know whether you can tell everyone, or whether like you don't know if people are going to get offended and think that you don't like pharmacy and you think you're better than them, or they're going to just be super supportive. And I feel like anyone that does it would say they love pharmacy. They respect all their pharmacist friends. You're not saying that they're better than any pharmacist that doesn't want to go to med school. It's not like it's like something, let's go to med school. It is definitely a commitment and a sacrifice, obviously. But I would say that people, like, you'll know when you really, when that itch to go to medical school never leaves you. like I said, everyone was saying, hey, when you start working and making money, you're not going to want to do that anymore. And so I started working, started making a little money, and I realized that I actually still wanted to do it, and even sometimes more. So those are like the signs where you realize, like, I think that I want to do it. And I think that if you feel that, you should do it when, when the opportunity is right. Because like I said, most people that do it, they feel super fulfilled once they do it. And most of the time I just tell people, like, as a pharmacist, sometimes we're limited in certain areas. And if you want a little more like patient interaction, if you want a little more like hands-on procedural stuff, essentially the only way you can go is to go to medical school, especially if you want more autonomy and like deciding what treatment plans the patients have and stuff like that. That's kind of how I describe it to people. It's kind of, you just want that a little bit more autonomy.
Of course. And I think that's a really good way to approach it because, like you said, some people might be like affronted when you say, oh, I'm switching out of pharmacy because I don't like it anymore. It's like, well, why? Pharmacists are very proud individuals, like, as we are pharmacists. So I guess you could say we're proud too. But, we wouldn't be the people we are today if we hadn't gone to pharmacy school. And so I think, I got to trust the process, and I love my roots, and I'm sure you do too.
Yeah. Definitely.
All righty. So let's talk a little bit about medical school now. You got almost a semester down. Well, you actually have a semester down, but you almost have the entire year completed at this point. So how do you think things have gone so far?
Things have gone pretty good. I would say that anatomy is very unique in medical school, and, pharmacy school doesn't really prepare you for that, even though anatomy is fascinating and doing a cadaver lab is a once in a lifetime experience. That is a real privilege and honor to be able to do. But I would say that it's going really well. I was saying before, really when you go to medical school, it's like you have a lot of gaps that weren't necessarily filled. And going back to the basics of anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, that just helps refine your pharmacology, refine your clinical skills. And I will say though, it is a lot more content in terms of like the quantity and how quickly you need to learn it. And I've been thinking about this for a while. And I think the reason is, I don't know what you think about this, but I think it's because in pharmacy school, you have 3 years of didactics and 1 year of clinical rotations. Mm-hmm. But then in medical school, you have 2 years of didactics in most schools. And then you go 2 years into clinicals. So it's like they pretty much have to teach you everything about the body, everything about what happens when it goes wrong in 2 years. And then they just put you into the clinic. So, that's why it's a little bit more faster paced than pharmacy school, even though the content isn't necessarily harder. It just comes at you a lot faster. And so I've definitely had to adjust to that. I never used Anki in pharmacy school, but I use it all the time now. Practice questions, just that like active retrieval and spaced repetition type learning is the stuff that you have to do when you're in medical school to be able to make it. So that adjustment has been great. It was a little shaky at first, but once I figured it out and gave, you kind of have a mindset of how you want to study, but then you just have to give in and like go with the program and just do practice questions, do Anki or however you study. But after that, it's been great, and I'm loving it now. I'm having a blast.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, like kind of synopsis of why you think medical school is like a lot, I guess, like just greater volume of content. I agree entirely. And I think it's really interesting too, because especially with regards to like the studying that you mentioned, like pharmacy school, I recall, like I never used Anki. I never used a lot of these like practice questions. I really just studied the PowerPoint slides or the lectures, or I had a big textbook and it had all the information about every drug ever known. And I would just memorize all the facts there. And a lot of pharmacy exams were just kind of regurgitation of those facts, just making sure that you know the medications in and out, every detail about them, every interaction. And so like to contrast that, and I'm sure you might like have a similar experience where like medicine is like, we don't know what's going on with this patient. So you have to take all these random facts from 15 different diseases and add them and say, well, this doesn't match. This doesn't fit the puzzle. So it's definitely, I think looking back, I have my regrets, and that would be not getting into Anki sooner and not doing practice questions sooner. I think I tried to continue with my pharmacy like based study approach, And it gave me a lot of headaches for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say like it took me a few, like we have blocked exams. So it's like every month you have a few exams. And it took me probably until the second block, even though people were telling me you need to do practice questions, you're going to need to do Anki. It's like you kind of have a hard head. You're like, okay, yeah. But then you go through it and you realize, yeah, I do need to do Anki or I need to do something different. And so, yeah, just giving into that way of learning, was kind of like a challenge, but definitely full on board now.
Excellent. And kind of speaking on the classes you just prefaced, you already took anatomy. And like I said, that's a very humbling experience. It was a very difficult course. So what are you taking now at this point for our listeners to know?
Yeah, definitely. So, first semester I took anatomy, biochem. Those are like the two main classes and some other smaller classes.
Mm-hmm.
This semester right now, I'm currently in physiology, genetics, immunology, histology, and those are the main classes. So obviously histology is like the study of tissues and cells and stuff. And genetics, everyone knows genetics. And immunology is great. It's like that class will follow you the rest of your life. And then physiology is obviously like the foundation of all medicine. And so those are the classes I'm taking right now.
Excellent. Yeah, I recall that I think the first semester was definitely one of the harder ones, just because it is an adjustment period, like you're saying. I remember the second semester being like the lightest when it came to course load. I don't know if you have a similar experience thus far. I mean, you only have two semesters, but
that's definitely true. And everyone was saying that, but it's true. Like once you finish anatomy and anatomy lab, you feel like you have all this time in the world. And, yeah, so second semester definitely is a lot lighter in terms of class. We have more time. And, yeah, I think it's just that anatomy. Once you get over that hill of anatomy, you feel like you could just do anything.
For sure. And be careful though, too, because after like you get to experience some of this like free time, like that's when the other stuff starts to creep in where you're like, okay, now I need to do research. Oh, I need to go get some more like shadowing experience, or I need to become like a leader in one of the clubs or organizations on campus.
Yeah.
So that stuff, if you were sick of it in pharmacy school for our listeners, it doesn't go away.
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
Alrighty. So, speaking on like kind of what you've gone through at this point, how would you say pharmacy school kind of compares to medical school? You've kind of prefaced like the volume component, but like, are there any other like features that you think are like kind of, similarities or maybe even some stark differences?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like I said before, the content and like the difficulty conceptually pretty similar. Volume is up by a lot in medical school, but, I would say that, we focus like in biochemistry, in pharmacy school, we focus more on like, the drugs and biochemical pathways like that. Whereas in medical school, you focus on like inborn errors of metabolism and all these like disease states and stuff. Hurlers and hunters, I'm sure you remember those.
I'm getting PTSD thinking about those.
Yeah. So yeah, I think sometimes like the curriculum is focused more towards like clinical medical stuff in medical school. Likely so, rightly so. Whereas in pharmacy school, it's more focused on the medications and stuff like that. But overall, I don't want to say medical school is harder, but I think it is. It's the volume. It's just the speed and the volume and just the pressure of like having to take step 1, step 2 during school. Whereas in pharmacy school, you don't have to take that final board exam and the law exam. In medical school, you have to take step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's just like you're taking board exams the rest of your life.
Of course, yeah. And for our listeners, like the step exams are basically like you take step 1 after you finish your didactic portion, which is like the first 2 years of medical school. Depending on where you go, it might be like a year and a half because they're kind of shifting the curriculum. A lot of programs are shifting to a shorter didactic period, which I honestly think is a good thing because it offers you more time for I suppose like electives and that's where you actually get exposure to like what kind of medicine you're interested in. So that is something I think that's on the horizon for sure. So you take step 1 after that, and then you take step 2 after your third year. So basically after your first year of clerkships. Fourth year is also clerkships, but they're really just like fine tuned to like picking electives that are in the specialty that you are going into. So, if I'm going into anesthesia, which I am, then I would take, 3, 4 anesthesia electives related to that. So cool. So speaking on kind of like the structure of medicine, what are some things that you're really looking forward to with your education?
Yeah, man. So I'm excited to. I'm interested in like GI and ophthalmology. So I'm trying to decide like going the internal medicine route versus ophthalmology route. And I'm just excited to get into the clinical stuff. Even though I am enjoying the didactic learning, like physiology again and biochemistry again, I will be excited to go into where my pharmacy background is really going to like pay off in the clinical area. In terms of like my second year is when that'll really start, and then going into clinicals, I feel like that's going to be fun. It's going to be hard and a lot, but I'm excited to get into the clinic, into the hospital and start rounding. And then residency, I know that's going to be tough, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it all. I'm really enjoying the process. Obviously, I'm in my first year. Like, I could be talking out of ignorance, but so far it's going good.
Excellent. And kind of last question tying this all together, but how do you think like your pharmacy training has really helped you kind of excel in medical school at this point?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nathan. And I think that I've been reflecting on that. And I would say it's not even the pharmacology. It's not even my background. I feel like it's the perspective that we have. And the perspective is that everything we're learning is like for a reason. Like, we're going to be able to use this in the hospital. We're going to see patients with these disease states, with these illnesses. And sometimes when you're in school and you're just learning about the Krebs cycle, which you might not use again, but like you just learn about like different things and you're like, when am I ever going to actually use this? If you don't have like past clinical experience, you might just, it's easy to get a tunnel vision mindset. But as pharmacists, and especially if you've worked and you understand how outpatient works and what patients have to deal with, you kind of just have perspective. Like, everything you're learning is important. Like, even when you're in a class where you're learning about evidence-based medicine, like different studies, like cohort studies and randomized control trials, you think that those are like pointless, but like really your whole life is going to be based around evidence-based medicine, interpreting data, interpreting research. And so I think that the number one thing that my pharmacy background has done is giving me perspective as I'm going through school again, to just look at the big picture of things and just enjoy every part of the journey.
Fantastic. And also shout out to episode 35, which I just had recorded with Andy Wynn, also known as NDMD. And it's funny, you mentioned Krebs cycle. He also talked about the Krebs cycle. So he said, and I'm going to butcher what he said, but he basically said, the only real Krebs cycle is learning it and then forgetting it again.
That's funny.
But that's awesome. So, I mean, it sounds like you've obviously had a terrific experience throughout medical school thus far. You're looking forward to a lot of like, new things that you're going to experience. And like you're saying, all this stuff, like the perspective certainly changes too, in the sense that the buck stops with you now. Like you have to become the best clinician possible. And I almost feel like there's a little bit of extra pressure in the sense that like, okay, we're a pharmacist and we're a physician. So all my classmates are like, well, you should know this. It's like, well, I certainly remember some things, but there's other things that kind of fade over time. So it's kind of funny, but like it definitely gives you like a lot of momentum to kind of continue on and try to be the best clinician that you can be. So I think it sounds like you're having a great experience with that. And so kind of transitioning to our next short segment, we're going to talk a little bit about, what is the motivation for starting your own YouTube channel? And it seems like you're kind of also planning on documenting the experience of making this transition. So could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I always wanted to, like, I always had in my head, like, if I got into medical school, it's a pretty unique journey. I want to definitely document it for people. It's probably the same thing that motivated you to start with physician pharmacist, is like, you were going through the process and you didn't really have many resources, and you had all these questions that were catered to pharmacy and pharmacists, but like you didn't have anyone to ask. You felt like you were on an island. And sometimes it's kind of like discouraging going on this journey alone, and you need some inspiration. So you go looking for inspiration and you don't really see anything. You're like, man, I don't even know people are doing this. But then, so that's why I started my channel. I wanted to document the journey and my unique journey so that others in the future that want to do the same thing will at least have some inspiration of people that have done it. And then once you realize, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, is like there's a lot more people than you realize that actually want to do it. And when you make a platform like the Physician Pharmacist, it attracts all these people, and then you realize you're not alone. There's a ton of people out there that are like crazy and want to go to medical school after pharmacy school. And yeah, so that's pretty much the whole motivation, was to document it to help people in the future that want to do the same thing, just have a little inspiration.
Excellent. Excellent. And I think like that's such a good point that you discussed. And I think you talked about it in your last video too, where you're talking about like the loneliness, like you're kind of operating in a silo where you're not sure, you said earlier, not sure who you should tell, who you got it, like it's kind of top secret. You don't want to offend anyone, but I'm also doing this like behind the scenes, like undercover, trying to apply to medical school. And that can be very daunting when you're sitting there, your 18th hour of the week looking at like MCAT textbooks. Like that sucks. So it's really cool that you're also trying to like build out this community where we can connect with other people who are going through this journey. And you're certainly right. Like I think there's a huge population of pharmacists out there who, as the landscape of pharmacy has changed just in the last 5 years, I think there's a lot more people who are motivated to explore this avenue. So we might have been, early in the pathway, but we're certainly not going to be the last.
Definitely not. Yeah, I think that it's gonna pick up a little bit. And I always say I don't want to ever like try to convince someone to do it. It's more of just like if someone's already made up in their mind they want to do it, just making that process a little less hectic and stressful. And so I don't want to like try to motivate like every pharmacist should go to med school. No, never. But if you really have been thinking about it and like contemplating and you want to do it, but just don't know how, that's pretty much like why I'm doing it, just to document it for your inspiration.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point too, because like that's kind of our mission in the sense that not a lot of people even know that this is an opportunity. Like a lot of people feel like they're trapped in the system or the structure that is presented in front of them. You go to pharmacy school, you finish pharmacy school, you do a residency, or you go into community pharmacy, and that's it. Don't look at any other options. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll get into a fellowship or something along those lines. But a lot of students like go through pharmacy school with the blinders on. And it's not to say like what you're saying is we're not going to try and pull people over into the medicine world, but we just want you to know like, hey, this is an opportunity that is available to you. And if you are interested in it, you should be able to explore it. And I think it's awesome.
Definitely. That's awesome.
Sweet, man. So we are getting to the end of our interview today, and I think it's time for our famous 3 questions. And these are the same 3 questions we ask every individual who comes on the podcast. So first question, how do you maintain a work-life balance in your demanding profession, especially since you're a content creator now? Do you have any tips or recommendations for others who are trying to achieve this same balance?
Yeah, obviously you got to be really organized, and sometimes I'm a little too into the content where I'm like sitting studying and like have all these ideas about videos to make. But I think you definitely have to be organized, but I don't think that you should shy away from it, because sometimes that doing that content is what helps you. You just get away from the studying for a little bit, record a video, upload it. If that's what you like to do, just content creation, I think that you should try to fit it into your schedule as like a study break. But you definitely got to be organized. You definitely don't want it to let it affect your studies. But I think that you won't ever regret documenting a journey or posting content 5 years from now, because you're going to want to wish, oh, what was it like? What was it like back when I was a first year or whatever? So I think that if you want to do content, if you have like extracurriculars that you want to do while you're in school, I think you should pursue them. Just like make time for it without letting it affect your studying and schoolwork.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Like, and it could really be summarized in just don't give up on your passions and the things that you care about. Just because school is hard or things are challenging doesn't mean that you have to like give up all of those things. Certainly, like there are going to be weeks where you're just not going to be able to do that. But I think that like the fact that you have this mindset already is going to go so far for you. So I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that.
All righty. So question number 2, Do you have any last minute recommendations for students or graduates who are interested in pursuing a career similar to your own?
I would do it while you have the passion and that drive. Because if you kind of let that drive pass, it might be harder to remotivate yourself. So like if you've already decided this is what I want to do, I'm doing it, I would like take action on it. Whereas if you haven't taken any prereqs yet, like do the prereqs, sign up for the MCAT. It won't be real to you until you pay for the MCAT, schedule it. Then you're gonna like force yourself to study but do it while you have that initial like I'm doing this, because if you let that pass, it's gonna be like a struggle probably to re-motivate yourself to study for the MCAT. That's my advice.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to have regrets down the road, looking back, wishing, I wish I had given it a shot. And
Yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned that too. I had a friend who ended up in pharmacy school, took the MCAT with us, and he took the MCAT, got a great score, and then sat down and said, you know what? I proved that I, could get in, and I'm not going to go. And he didn't go. And, he's had a terrific career and great life, as a pharmacist. And, he just kind of like, he explored that option. And I think that's, it's fun, a fun story I like to share
That is
sometimes.
funny, yeah.
Alrighty. And so our final question for the night, what are your personal, professional, or business oriented goals you'd like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years? Big question.
That's a big question, man. It's a good one though. Obviously I'm sure everyone says they want to graduate medical school, they want to match into residency. I want to do potentially a fellowship in GI, so that's a major goal. And in the future, 10 years from now, I'll be in attending by God's grace. And I see myself long term, like I like private practice, whether it's like with a group or just opening my own. I see myself going in that route. And then I also see myself, I noticed that I'm kind of like entrepreneurial in a way, where I always like thinking of ways, whether it's like coaching or just starting something, launching something. So whether in the future I launch like some type of like coaching program or just some type of business, even whether it's my own practice or just an online digital business, I see myself doing something like that. And obviously I'm married and I want to be a father. So that's something in the future as well.
Excellent. Excellent. Alrighty, we've come to the end of our interview today, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey, check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. Before we let you go, Michael, how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about you?
Yeah. So if you want to follow me, I'm mostly active on Instagram. So you can reach me at mcogbonna, Ogbonna. That would probably be the best way. If you want to email me, if you have any questions, you can email me at the same mcogbonna, Ogbonna @gmail.com. And yeah, I do have a YouTube channel, like Nathan said. So if you want to subscribe and follow along the journey, y'all can, that would be helpful as well.
Excellent. And all of that information will be linked down in the show notes below. So thank you again, Michael, for being on the podcast. Really do appreciate your time. I know first year is pretty busy, so I do enjoy having you on the podcast and taking time to chat today.
No, thanks so much for having me, man. It's been an honor.
All righty. Take care.